As South Africa celebrates Workers' Day, we look at strides made to address the rights of workers since 1994. We will also look at issues related to unemployment in the country, especially ahead of the key May 29 elections. For this discussion, we're now joined via video link by COSATU National Spokesperson Matthew Parks, SAFTU Spokesperson Trevor, Shaku, and Public Interest SA Tebogo, Khaas. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for being on the show, this afternoon. So today's Workers' Day, is being used to reflect on the gains made in the 30 years of democracy. The day also happens, at the same time when the country's staggering unemployment rate stands at 32.1%. Perhaps, Matthew Parks, let's start with you and get your view on how the country's unemployment rate seems to be overshadowing the undeniable role that, firstly, unions and other civil organizations have played over the years, especially when you look at, minimum wage and other workers' rights.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us, and good afternoon to the colleagues. It's a chance, it's a rallying point for workers to reflect on the struggles they've gone through for many years. May Day became a public holiday in 1994 after COSATU had campaigned for it for many, many years, and our successor SAFTU as well, to become a public holiday. It's a chance to celebrate our victories from a democratic dispensation to the progressive laws that COSATU has worked to ensure are put into place, affirming the rights of workers, improving their working conditions, but also the fact that we spend about 60% of the state budget nowadays investing in working class communities, from free schools in our townships to millions of children or learners put through university, through NSFAS, to the 27 million South Africans, most poorly paid, impoverished compatriots who receive some sort of financial relief from the state. It's also about saying what are the recent victories we managed to achieve. A national minimum wage 4 years ago, which has raised the wages of 6 million workers from farm to domestic workers. It's about the two-part pension reforms coming into effect on the 1 September, which COSATU has driven with the support of our colleagues from the ANC in Parliament, which is going to give relief to millions of workers. And we celebrate all of these victories, we rightly claim them, but also we can't be satisfied when 4 out of 10 South Africans can't find work, when 6 out of 10 young people struggle to enter the labour market, when we really have entrenched crime and corruption across society, not just in the state, when we still have deeply painful levels of poverty and inequality. So I think for us, also about putting pressure on government, our partner, the ANC, but also upon employers in the private sector too, that we need to do much better. We need to move towards a living wage. And of course, workers are voters. We're not apolitical. We have a vested interest in the outcome of elections. It's a chance for us to rally our members to support the ANC as the only political vehicle which has ever been with workers in the trenches, which has ever championed working class interests. So it's an important event set up by workers across federations in South Africa and, of course, across the world as well.
Trevor, let me bring you in, Mr. Shaku, as SAFTU, as we reflect on the gains made in the last 30 years, as we've been hearing, since the 27th of April. While the advent of democracy has no doubt brought, with it better rights, but has it gone far enough for South Africans in as far as economic inequality is concerned? As we sit, the number of unemployed working age people in South Africa rose to 7.9 million.
Sure. Look, on the political and legal side, we have actually made strides in ensuring that we secure the protection for workers in terms of the legal frameworks which would have been achieved and enacted after 1994. Just the repealing of the Industrial Conciliation Act and replacement of that with the Labour Relations Act in 1995, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, all of those represents a step forward insofar as the legal and political front is concerned for workers. But as Matthew has pointed out, there are, of course, problems in relation to socioeconomic interests of workers. The living standards of our people have become stagnant, if not become to be reversed, because look, for instance, the unemployment that has already been mentioned. You have 11.6 million people who cannot find employment. This is expanded definition, of course. But secondly, you have in the very economy more than 16 million of the people who are able to find work. 75% of them are earning less than 5,800 per month. Now, if you were to take this and compare it with the calculations made by the Pietermaritzburg Social Justice, Economic Justice, Dignity Group, with their Household Affordability Index, you'll realize that just the average cost of a household grocery goes beyond 5,000. And this does not include personal and domestic hygienic products, does not include transport, fuel, it does not include electricity. Now, if you were to collate all of these basic necessities that a worker and a household needs, you would realize that a majority of the working people in this country are not able really to afford. And this reflects the decline in their living standards. The fiscal austerity measures which the African National Congress has actually implemented with much fanfare and defended over the recent period have diminished the quality of the public goods which are offered in education, in health, correctional service, and throughout the public service, including in the public corporations, because part of government investments is not only in ensuring that it delivers quality public services, but it is to ensure that infrastructure development through municipalities and the production of goods by the state corporations is underway to, in particular, subsidize workers, because the goods which we assume, and ideally the goods which are produced by state corporations ought to be of low cost so that they can be affordable to workers. Now, the decline in the public service qualities as a result, and the privatization of energy provision, the privatization that has taken place in the communication industry, starting first with telecom. Today, they are, of course, dismantling post office. Now, if you were to look at these things in aggregate, you'll realize that the living standards of our people have actually declined over the past years.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Khaas, let me bring you into this conversation. I mean, when we look at 30 years of democracy, we're seeing now, of course, that's been, termed 30 years of freedom. But many would argue that, given the inequality in the country, and also, what some of the matters that the two gentlemen are raising now, the high levels of unemployment, especially when you look at how this has affected the youth, then it becomes harder to even celebrate days like today and even the country's other milestones. Just your take on where we are in terms of unemployment. Can you please unmute yourself, Mr. Khaas?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I agree fully with the two gentlemen's views insofar as joblessness and other challenges that we are faced as a country, especially when it comes to joblessness. And at the same breath, much as we can acknowledge and admit that it's universal acknowledgement that there's been some gains made insofar as the employment or the labor market is concerned in terms of improving the basic conditions of employment and many other gains that came through after 1994. But the current dispensation, if we are to agree that government's role is not to create jobs, but to create an enabling environment for job creation, the current dispensation does not lend itself very well to job creation. And job creation, we know whom create jobs. It is not government that creates jobs. It is the private sector that creates jobs. But the current environment is such that both the labor market or the labor federations and business, on the one hand, they don't seem to be a concerted effort to ensure that there's a better understanding of the conditions that can improve or improve joblessness and make sure that many people get to be employed. Because for as long as startups and SMEs struggle to maintain or to sustain employment, we are going to find entrepreneurs not wanting to take risks to employ people. For example, if you employ somebody and you have to compete with the salaries in the as stipulated by or mandated by law, chances are you cannot compete with the likes of the big banks or the big players in the economy. And as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you tend to want to avoid this type of risk because it's just unavoidable and you cannot be able to mitigate it. And not only that's the cost of employment and even the cost of attending to employment, because the support structure says that if I have to attend to a CCMA matter, for example, as an entrepreneur, the owner of a business, it means I must down my tools to go and attend to a matter myself. And the commission, while my business is struggling, I could be making more opportunities or creating more business, contributing to the economy. So we need to also revisit the current dispensation and make sure that we allow recognition of the environment, the varieties that are faced by entrepreneurs, especially small businesses. And because to demand of small businesses the same as you would of big business, I think is a bit unfair, and that contributes to this. And remember, it's a matter of market demand and supply. Whether we like it or not, ours is also a market economy of varying degrees. Obviously, there's mixed economy of sort because the state ownership also in the flow.
Right.
But as long as when the unemployment rate is high, you're going to find that the wages are going to be low. And for as long as that is the case, we're going to lament low wages for forever.
All right. I mean, a lot has been said, by the three of you. I want to just touch on the point that was made now by Mr. Khaas in terms of, government needs to create conducive environments to create jobs. On that note, then, let's look at SOEs. I mean, the poor financial health at the country's SOEs has highlighted several missed opportunities, by government, many would argue, to the nation's socio-economic woes. I mean, just today, as also was pointed out earlier on, we are reporting that the retrenchment of close to 4,900 post office employees will go ahead. So I want to pose this question to you then. How can the country overhaul state-owned enterprises to address the unemployment crisis in the country? Perhaps, Matthew, you can take this.
Yeah, look, I think with the SOEs, it is easy to be frustrated at them. They've been through a very painful decade of state capture and corruption. They've suffered because of a lack of competent permanent management. We saw at Eskom, for example, a musical chairs for a decade where a CEO would be changed every few months. There was an underinvestment in infrastructure. Many of them, like Transnet and Eskom, Metro, have suffered because of the pandemic of cable theft, of vandalism, of arson, of criminality and corruption and so forth. But I think also take a step back. A decade ago, all of our SOEs, Eskom, Transnet, Metro Rail, and so forth, Denel, were highly respected, very efficient contributors to their sector's economic growth. There have been deep structural shifts, but we're beginning to see some positive green shoots. But I think the bottom line is we can't afford for these SOEs to fail. We have to fix Eskom. And I think we've seen real progress in the past year when we moved from the calamity of 12 hours of load shedding a day to now for 30 days, no load shedding. We're not out of the woods yet. Eskom is doing well under new management, dealing with the issue of ramping up maintenance. But what we need to do now is make sure we bring on board new generation capacity if we're permanently to close the chapter of load shedding. But that's critical to ensure all workplaces can be productive. We have seen a stabilization of Transnet with the new leadership coming on board. Again, it's very, very fragile because Transnet is critical to hundreds of thousands of jobs in the mining, the manufacturing, the agricultural sectors. It's critical to state revenue, which funds our public services. So we need to make sure we modernize our ports. We need to make sure we secure our Transnet freight rail, but also our Metro Rail lines from the issues of cable theft. And again, if Metro Rail can be operational once again like it used to be, and we are seeing most lines that have been reopened now, the remaining few lines will be reopened shortly, that's going to boost the economy in urban centers because it transports about 10 million workers and commuters in our urban centers. So we need to make sure we give the rest of the package of support from competent management, law enforcement support to deal with corruption and criminality, investment in infrastructure, debt relief as well. The post office is a tragedy, and largely because of incompetent management. It allowed the ball to slip. There's been deep structural shifts in the postal sectors, but there is a plan. We all have engaged with the Minister of Communications and Labour literally on an hourly basis to resolve the issue. We are disappointed by the news yesterday that the CCMA has declined the proposal for the UF to intervene with the TERS package, but we are convinced we can resolve the issue in the next day or two, but we have to. And the post office won't survive on the old business model of sending letters because that has shifted fundamentally. But if you look at the courier service, And there's now a postal bill which has been passed by Parliament, which will enable the post office to enter the courier space, which is highly lucrative, to also become a multi-purpose government one-stop shop where you can apply for your civic services like your IDs, for your social grants, for your NSFAS, for your SME funding. So we need to move with speed because ultimately you are dealing with mothers and fathers, people who are breadwinners, and we're dealing with impact upon communities, especially working class communities. So we need to move with much greater speed. But I think at least we're moving out of the decade of state capture and corruption. But now we need to move with speed and rebuild our SOEs.
Trevor, your take?
Sure. Look, the problem with the state-owned enterprises, in my view, is in relation to, or rather the causes of that, is the ruling party. Firstly, if you look at the vandalism, but secondly, corruption. The state is the only entity that has monopoly on violence. If you leave people to vandalize public goods and public resources, but you have such monopoly on violence, who are you going to turn to blame at the end of the day? We think that the state has actually been sleeping on duty and on the wheel, and as a result has led the criminal elements to reap the railway, for instance. If you look at both the passenger railway and freight railway. But secondly, you have the very same criminal entities who have actually vandalized some of the centers of stations which belonged to PRASA before. Why is the state not intervening to ensure that it clamps down on these particular elements? If you look at corruption, we are still again confronted with the mismanagement of the ruling party. It is the ruling party choices of deployment into these particular entities, which has led us to this level. Unfortunately, what this corruption and vandalism have done is to discredit state ownership. It is to discredit public ownership. So we don't agree that the state inherently will fail, or public ownership inherently will fail, and will not lead to job creation and sustainability of those particular jobs. In fact, if anything, when the private sector says that the state has to create an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to grow the economy and create jobs, in fact, what they're looking for is de-risking financial instruments, is the state support in the main. So they can't come later when they are looking for the state to intervene to help them create such particular jobs, to say that the state ownership is problematic and the state should actually be displaced out of the economy and job creation. We are opposed to that. In fact,
Trevor, I'm running out of time. I want us to wrap very quickly, and I'm going to give you a chance just to come back to that point. But I want to quickly bring in Mr. Khaas in as far as we're saying, that SOEs can address the nation's socio-economic woes. I mean, how can the country overhaul then these state-owned enterprises, as the other gentleman was saying, to address unemployment in the country? Very quickly, if you can.
Yes, I hear the word corruption being bandied across the board. In other words, pointing the fingers at failures of state-owned enterprises to corruption, which is quite correct. But one thing that I don't see happen, especially from the Labour Federation, is to say it is the role of the federations and what is it that they're doing with the workers, because it's the individuals who work in those institutions who commit this kind of egregious corruption. What is the Labour Federation doing actively, or the unions doing actively, to dissuade their members from plundering or replacing union coal with rocks that lead to perennial problems in the Eskom generation system? What is the labour movement doing to support workers who want to blow the whistle? And what is it that, in terms of not only advocacy, but actively being involved to present tools to empower those at the shop floor to ensure that such corruption is stymied? Because to say government is responsible for everything, I think that's where we begin to make a mistake, because it should be that we also take some level of responsibility, both as a labor movement and public society and public civil society. So for one, I'd say while we know that government could be doing a lot, but also what is it that we are doing in our own space to try and alleviate or mitigate those challenges. Mr.
Khaas,
as a last part from my side on this topic alone, if, for example, you don't have interagency collaboration, you are going to find it difficult for SMEs to actually even come in and chip in. If a post office gets to be unbundled, a former employee of the SA Post Office may want to start a company, but when CIPC's performance is at 40% availability in the last week, for example, you are going to find it difficult for entrepreneurship to take root, to access intellectual property systems and so forth, to be able to conduct business and create more employment opportunities.
Mr. Khaas, thank you. You've said a lot. Gentlemen, Mr. Khaas has posed a question to both of you in terms of the responsibility of unions. 30 seconds, please, if you can. And that, of course, will take us to the wrap of this conversation. Matthew, 30 seconds, just responding to what Mr. Khaas was saying.
Yeah. No, look, we would agree. We have to work closely with government, with business to resolve our common issues. They can't do it on their own. We can't do it on our own. So, for example, we've been involved at all levels. We've had municipal workers assassinated, murdered in Vembe for exposing corruption. I'm surprised Mr. Khaas hasn't heard about that. We've had many other workers being murdered in Gauteng, public servants who've blown the whistles. We've engaged extensively with government about how to tighten public procurement to deal with the cesspool of corruption. Our affiliate SAFTU, clothing workers, are working extensively with SARS about tackling customs evasion, because that's also a form of corruption by the private sector. And ultimately, we all want South Africa to succeed. That's why in the industrial master plans, our unions are working closely with government and business to remove the obstacles to growing the economy, to create jobs, make businesses successful, because ultimately we all benefit. And as a consequence, we've seen the number of cars being produced locally grow from 300,000 a few years ago to 400,000 today. We've seen in the clothing master plans, the big retailers committing to increasing their stock of locally produced clothes by 50%. And that means jobs, it means companies are safe, it means revenues flowing to the state. And ultimately, we all need to work together to resolve our issues.
Yeah, Trevor, branding, corruption all over the place. What is your take? What is your role as unions? Very quickly as well, 30 seconds, please.
Look, we've taken initiatives and the charge that we are not reprimanding our workers, or rather dealing with our workers who are involved in these things, is not true, because we've come, first of all, we have codes of conduct which by themselves bar workers from doing such things. If we are to find them doing those things, would of course chase them out of the unions or dismiss them or suspend them or expel them. Secondly, we have come out on every corruption matter to call for the head of those who are actually conducting or stealing and looting state resources. So in addition to that, we've also come out to not only write in statements to call out for the prosecution of those who are found to be involved in corruption activities. We've also campaigned both through legal but also political strikes to ensure that there is accountability, but also those workers who are found to be involved in corrupt activities are brought to book and possibly incarcerated, because this is actually what we've been calling for, that whoever is found to be stealing from the state, from the public, must be prosecuted and incarcerated.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Of course, a very complex topic in a very short space of time, but I do appreciate that you came on to just give us analysis on that. Of course, my guest there, COSATU's national spokesperson, Matthew Parks, SAFTU spokesperson, Trevor, Shaku, and public interest, SA Tebogo, Khaas, of course, discussing a range of issues affecting workers and South Africans across the country as we especially head to those crucial elections.